Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for joining me this morning for the second reading of David Rogers Webb's book called The Great Taking. Just give me a couple of minutes to set everything up for the live stream on some of the other channels. All right, I appreciate your patience. And I want to remind you that this is a 1 hour event that takes place every Friday from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock in the morning Central Time. And the book itself was actually gifted to me and JP by a patron. And it's one of the most important books that is out there at the moment, I have to admit. And hello, Sean. Thank you for joining today. I wish I could be on camera, but we're again in the middle of still fixing up the house. We actually have a plumber coming later, and we have some other things that we need to do. So we're rounding the corner of almost being finished with this big house project for the new house we moved into a couple of months ago here in Biloxi, Mississippi. So we're really happy about the outcome and the success of moving here. But I did not want to let too much time go by, because I felt that this book was one of the most important things that we have seen come across our path in a long time. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples before I go into continuing the reading. And just so you know, I got a few pages into the prologue last week, which was part 1 of the reading. This is part 2 of the reading. And the prologue itself is actually very long. So it's probably going to take me maybe a couple of weeks to get into the prologue and finish it, and then actually get into the start of the book and the meat of the book. But I enjoy these discussions. I enjoy having you guys make comments and, come on in and give feedback about, what you've experienced over the last 3 years in what David Rogers Webb's book is talking about, which is the Great Taking. And that's really what the thing that was coined back in 2020, which was called the Great Reset. That's really what it is. And I had mentioned that before on a couple of occasions throughout the years in these broadcasts. I have said, this feels more like a great taking. And JP has gone into great detail about how this is a debt system. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, before I go back into the reading, was, you remember last week I said that we left everything that we knew. We left San Francisco. We couldn't sustain a lifestyle in there anymore, or a life at all there anymore, because there was no income. So we basically took the last bit of cash that we had, which was in a retirement account, and we bought an old house, a 100-year-old house in a neighborhood of deep poverty in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we bought the house with cash, and then we fixed it up a little bit, and then we sold it 5 years later and moved to Biloxi. But in the time that we were living there, we moved there in the fall of 2018. And by the spring or so of 2019, the following year, we had made some headway with the neighbors. And what we wanted to do was start a neighborhood association. And this was around, the winter or the spring of 2019. And so we had a block party. We closed down the street so that kids could come out and play ball and ride their bikes, without having to worry about traffic. We encouraged the neighbors to come out and bring food. And we tried to encourage the neighbors, whether you were a renter or an owner, or whether you were somebody that was running a small business, or whether you had jobs that you actually went to. The fact is we wanted to encourage and inspire our neighbors in our new neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to create a neighborhood association. And through this sort of community empowerment would would be certain bylaws and charter agreements that your municipal board, which are the people that would control how your city or how your county or how your borough or your township operates, they would have to answer to you first. And so we were attempting to create this language of empowerment civically through these people, because one of the things that I had said to them, in 2019, okay, this was the winter, the spring of 2019 or so. One of the things I had said was, what if your leadership, your more powerful people who are in like your community development center or the people who are running your municipality, what if your board of your municipality, for instance, comes to you and says out of the blue that you have to close down your businesses for no apparent reason? If you don't have a charter, if you don't have some kind of civic empowered, you know, rules that everybody has to follow, then they can just run roughshod over your ability to earn an income. And the people that we spoke about these things to were starting to come around. They were starting to finally get it. We got some pushback in the beginning. We were, sort of scoffed at. We were, all the things that take place when you're newcomers in a new neighborhood, and then you try to implement ideas or inspire people to be civically empowered. Usually you get pushback. You can't expect everybody to just fall at your feet and say, "Oh, you're the best thing that ever happened." That wasn't the case with us. Some people really appreciated where we were coming from and started to really feel like this was important. And again, this was in 2019 in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. And so, as you all know, by the spring of 2020, everything did shut down. And it was unfortunate that the neighborhood association that we had spent so much time and energy trying to forge with these people and help encourage them to develop that civic empowerment. It just kind of everybody just kind of scattered to the wind once the municipality and once the leadership said you have to shut everything down. So it was at that point that the locals finally said, after a few months into the lockdowns and not being able to go to work and run their businesses, and hearing more from us about how this is dangerous territory, because it really does go against, everything. They finally started to say, you know what, maybe the Collinses were right. Maybe we should have created a stronger neighborhood association with charters and bylaws. If those charters had been in place and stamped into, law, so to speak, and were recognized by the municipality, then they could have easily said, "I'm sorry, but I need more proof about a health scare. Your rules and your laws don't override these charters that the neighborhood association has in place." And so this is something too that David Rogers Webb has talked about in some of his interviews that he's done with people. Since the release of the book about a month or a month and a half ago, he has gained in popularity, of course, and has given many interviews. So really quickly, what I'm going to do is, if I can remember how to do this, I'm going to share a screen. And I'm going to show you the Great Taking. There it is, the Great Takings Twitter page, or it's on X. And so that's David Rogers Webb there in the glasses talking to somebody. So a couple of you had said, well, where can I find him? Where can I would like to hear, what you reading the book is great. And I appreciate your anecdotes prior to reading the book. But where can I find the actual man? Like, I want to see him. I want to see what interviews he's given. So the Twitter page is a really good starting point. And what's really unfortunate is that one of the most important things that's taking place in the country right now is this knowledge about the great taking, and yet look at how few followers he has on Twitter. So let's try to bump up those followers for him as well. Okay. So let me go ahead and leave that up there for a few minutes, and continue to talk about how we were attempting something called, like JP just commented, we were attempting something called collective autonomy. And so that, and I also like to use the term, civic empowerment, but collective autonomy is definitely, a good phrase to remember. Um, so let me go ahead and remove this off the screen because it's a bit distracting. Okay. And then another thing that I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of debt and cash and all this. Okay. So we like to pay for our, like, if we go out to eat, we like to pay with cash. Every time we put down, if the bill is $30 and we put down, $36 in cash or $38 in cash or $40 in cash, and then leave the server the tip. The servers really like it. They just they love cash, and it just makes things a lot easier for life when you pay in cash, doesn't it? And it also keeps cash currency viable, and it still keeps it necessary in the local economy. So I'm always encouraging people to pay with cash as much as they can. But there's another aspect to this great taking and to these systems of debt and these tools of debt, and securities, um, that are sort of on the other end of this conversation about cash. Okay. And the only way that I can really describe to you what I mean is if I give you an example. So let's say that you have been driving a car for the last 20 years of your life, and it's pretty much on its last leg. You put a lot of money into keeping it running, and it's just a money suck and a time suck, and it's the bane of your existence. But you need a vehicle in order to get, to pick your kids up from school or to go to work. So you just keep driving your vehicle and hope that it doesn't break down when you need it, right? We've all been there, right? So, and then let's say, it's been 20 years, you're driving this terrible car, and out of nowhere, say like a distant relative dies and leaves you an inheritance or a windfall. And say they leave you $100,000. Okay. So you now have enough money to go buy a new car with cash, don't you? I would say you could buy a new car with cash for maybe even 30,000. Okay. So you take that cash and you go and buy the car. You go buy a brand new shiny car, all the bells and whistles. It's the best car you've ever had. You're super excited. You paid for it with cash. You don't have to worry about making payments on it every month because you had the cash to pay for it, right? And so a lot of us are like, yeah, that's great. That's exactly how we should all try to be living, is save our money and then buy things with cash. I mean, that's kind of what we did when we purchased the house in McKees Rocks, right? We talk about how we you know we went into a retirement account before we should have and used the cash to buy the house. Okay. So a lot of people, think that it's very good to buy things with cash, especially new things, which are very expensive. Okay. So the way the debt system is currently set up and the way the the system works against you in every way possible is, say the dealership that you bought the brand new shiny car from defaults on their loans and they have to go out of business. Um, and so they need, in order you know, um, in order to get the funding from the business, the bank then has to absorb all of that business assets, right? And believe it or not, that even includes the car that you paid cash for. So even after you paid cash for it and it's totally in your name, the title's in your name and everything, the the bank or whatever lending agent that is attached to the dealership who had to go out of business, they are going to still consider your car that you paid cash for as an asset that they can absorb in order to um, recoup their losses on this bad deal because the dealership went out of business. You see what I'm saying? So that's the world we live in. And it's so insidious because here you are, you've paid cash for something, and here comes the bank to take it, not because you've defaulted on anything, but because the business that you purchased it from was living on loans and living on funding of some sort. That funding dried up. Those loans were, no longer able to be met. The debt to pay off those loans were never able to be met. And so the company that owns the dealership then turns to you and says, well, you bought the car from them. So but there is a way to be okay in this scenario. And again, that way is through civic engagement and really, really getting to know your neighbors and really, really getting to know the people who aren't in debt to big corporations or big lending houses or big banks in order to keep their companies running. That's hard because those are the things that seem to be the most available to us. But say you are in that position where you have this windfall of cash and you can buy a brand new car because the beater that you've been driving around is just falling apart. Think carefully about where you go to buy that new car. Do you want to go to a fancy dealership that's known throughout the country who's probably in debt? Maybe look at where they are financially. And if it seems like they're just breaking even or they're not doing so great on the, financially, then maybe go to a smaller dealer, a neighborhood dealer who you trust, and word of mouth says that this person is trustworthy and sells good cars and that they own their own business, and maybe it's a family business and they don't have to take out too many loans in order to run the business. You see what I'm saying? So do your due diligence, do your research before you get involved in something like that. Now, there's a lot of complicated things that go on in the background. We're currently on a mortgage, for instance, and the mortgage company that we are with, we trust, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be absorbed by one of the bad guys, right? So, which would then screw us probably. So, these are difficult times, and you just have to be, in order to live the kind of life you want to live, you just have to be really aware of it, at least be aware of it. So I wanted to talk about those couple of topics, before I continued the reading, how important collective autonomy is, which is, civic engagement or civic empowerment, how important it is to, encourage your community leaders to pay respect and acknowledge the people who run the businesses that keep your economy going, your local economy going. All right. So we'll go ahead and begin the reading and continue with the book. And like I said, I'm in the prologue. And so continuing on, what we've learned about David Rogers Webb so far and what I've read from part 1 is that he grew up in Cleveland and he watched Cleveland go from being a thriving, beautiful little town to basically just falling apart and being destroyed and rotting from the inside out. And he mentions that he comes from a family of engineers and medical people. So when he decided he wanted to go into finance and really look into it, he was sort of, his family wasn't too supportive of that. So, and he went to school. So let's continue with the prologue. Okay. Let me get a sip of water because I'm still in my orthodontics and I have a mouthful of plastic. So sometimes it's hard to talk. Okay. My wife, Valerie, and I were married 2 weeks after my graduation. 2 weeks after that, I started work with a computer service firm. I had some experience with programming, and after a further 90-day training program, I chose to go to their office at 44 Wall Street as a technical representative rather than as a salesman. The cost of the monthly rent and train pass were so high, and I was being paid so little that we could not afford a telephone or meet. But over the next year, supporting the sales teams, I was able to go into a huge number of entities in New York working with financial information, investment banks, commercial banks, brokerage firms, bond houses, investment partnerships, rating agencies, and even depository trust corp. I was allowed to be there to show them how to get the information they needed and to make it happen. I went to meetings every day and programmed applications late into the night. Eventually, I could see where I was going. Within a year, I somehow talked my way into a mergers and acquisitions group, which was a client. After a series of high stress interviews, I was told by the head of the group, Mad Dog Jeff Beck, if you turn out to be a psychopath or a pathological liar, we give you a bonus. Jeff knew of what he spoke. He may not have been the former, but years later, he proved to have been struggling with the latter in a big way. Lies are a trap, and perhaps especially to those who tell them. It eventually destroyed him. He once said to me in a self deprecating way, "You are a real person." The people my age were the son of a billionaire, the daughter of a fantastically wealthy Hong Kong family, and the son of the chairman of a Fortune 500 company. I was allowed to be there for only one reason. I could figure out how to do what needed to be done. There was a bit of pressure. I had been told by a senior vice president, you better be sure you want to do this because if you fuck up, you're gone. For the following 5 years, it was a regular occurrence to work 7 days a week, and for several days without sleep. Our first child was born. We were then living in Brooklyn Heights, a tiny apartment, just one subway stop from the office at One New York Plaza. If I had been home and had to return to the office, reaching the elevator bank, my heart would start racing because I did not know how many days I would be there without leaving. I thought of it as a crucible. It is through reactions and uncomfortable conditions that one comes to know oneself and others. I had encountered many such reactions and could maintain focus under great pressure and with little sleep when a headhunter approached me to go to work for Ivan Boesky, later dubbed Ivan the Terrible. The starting compensation would have been roughly 10 times what I was being paid at the time. I was considering doing it, but it was not really about the money. Through those years, I was living by Nietzsche's "that which does not kill me makes me stronger." I was already working around the clock for extreme personalities. Why not do it? I would have been on a three-man team sitting directly outside of an open window into Boski's office through which he could bark orders, but which he could close for his private and sensitive conversations. They wanted me there to do quick breakup models and valuations of big companies, which I was capable of doing overnight. Fortunately for me, that discussion suddenly went cold. He was arrested shortly after that, and so I learned a bit about the lure of money and of being careful about one's choices and associations. We had moved to a big old house in Chatham, New Jersey, and it invited my mother and my wife's mother with her youngest son to move in with us. I was still in survival mode and wanted to take care of everybody. The commute into the city was an hour and a half each way, 3 hours a day. 1/12 of the year was commuting. I made use of that time, but little remained to simply be at home with the family. In 1967, I had an offer to join the mergers and acquisitions group at LF Rothschild. Instead, I chose to move for half the compensation to a private equity firm. I knew about the agency side of the deal business. I needed to know about the principal side. I also somehow sensed that there would be a crash. 1 month later, on Black Monday, the capital of L.F. Rothschild was wiped out, and the firm soon ceased to exist. In 1987, I had an offer. I had joined what was at that time the largest private equity firm in the world, having just raised a $1.3 billion fund that used to be a lot of money. Most of the partners were attorneys and were depending upon an accounting firm to do their financial analysis. That was amazing to me, as I had experienced that the very process of doing one's own financial analysis is critical to developing an understanding. Within a few weeks, it was noticed that I could find major errors in the financial models done by the accountants. The first year, I imagined the acquisition of a long-distance telephone company, building the financial model, designing and running the due diligence, negotiating the financing, and running the legal teams. It was a complex process requiring coordination of hundreds of people. The responsibility for all of this was crushing. The partner on the deal, having a difficult time with stress, went home and stayed in bed for 6 months. Sometimes it was unavoidable that I work through the night, perhaps sleeping briefly on the floor. More regularly, I took a waiting limousine to our house in Chatham to sleep for a few hours, only to get up again to take the train back into the city. Saturday mornings began with negotiations at 8 a.m., extending until 3 a.m. Sunday morning, and beginning again at 8 a.m. Sunday morning. This pace went on for 9 months. The due diligence, filling a bank of file cabinets, and summarized in a single notebook, was selected to demonstrate the capabilities of the firm to the limited partners. This deal was to produce the largest capital gain in the history of the firm. The deal books fill a shelf. I signed every document. I was 28. Sometime after the closing, I was called down to the corner office and told I could do anything at the firm. However, my family was suffering from these many years of my intense focus. The move to the private equity side had only increased the intensity, as I could not escape the encompassing responsibility. Our second child was born in the first months of this deal. I had to be on the telephone outside the delivery room for an hour and a half, handing things off so that I could be with my wife and newborn son for 2 days. Some months after this deal had closed, my wife told me that if she had known that our life would be this way, she would not have signed up for it. This came as quite a blow. I thought I was a hero to my family. I told her that we could go anywhere and do anything, and got out the road atlas of the U.S. We paged through it state by state, trying to imagine where we could be happy. Ultimately, I simply left the firm and we moved back to Cleveland in an attempt to find a more balanced way of living. We moved to the house in 1920 in Cleveland Heights. 2 of our children were born in that house. It was within the sound of church bells I remembered from childhood visits at Grandpa Webb's house. The intensity remained. Eventually, I started with partners in a small investment management business. I developed the view that the public markets offered greater insufficiencies and better opportunities to both buy and sell than the private markets. I knew how to do deep research and analysis. I needed to know how the markets and the broader financial system worked. From the beginning of my involvement, I handled all trading and went on to develop the trading processes, strategies, and teams. At first, I managed long-only equity and then long-short equity. The firm grew from $2 million to $2 billion in assets over 9 years. While it was not then, and it is not now generally understood, decline in the velocity of money marked the beginning of the Asian financial crisis, eventually leading to the ruble crisis and failure of long-term capital management. Through direct handling of all trading, I could see that something significant had changed in the internals of the market. It was plain to me that this was not just an atmosphere of crisis, but the beginning of a real crisis. Few had the same sense, and this was the cause of conflict within our firm. It is best in a turbulent time to sell the peaks and buy the dips. Some people like to do it the other way around. At about this time, our third child, a pre-reader, picked up the stock listing from the newspaper and exclaimed, "This says, oh no." On Thursday, August 27th, I left with my children for a long weekend canoe trip in Canada, this being our only vacation for the summer of 1998. I called into the office Thursday morning from the canoe livery and was then without access to telephones. While I was away, instructions were given to remove the entire short position protecting the hedge fund from loss, and the employees were called together to announce that I would be leaving the firm. This was all unbeknownst to me as I was enjoying a tiny bit of life with my family. Let me interject here. The same thing happened to me. I worked for lawyers and was a very good employee for many years. And I decided to go on a vacation and came back, and the part-time painter that they had hired to answer telephones had my job, and I was no longer needed. So I'm familiar with that story. Arriving early in the office on Monday, August 31st, I was stunned to learn of what had transpired while I had been in the wilderness. To my further amazement, I was informed that there had been a, quote, palace revolt, and that from the moment going forward, I would have unquestioned sole responsibility for the hedge fund. Perhaps this was due to the grim fact that all of the hedges had been removed, in combination with the imminent possibility of a full-blown market crash. This day would see the largest ever point declines in all market indices, other than the Dow 30, which suffered the second highest point decline in history. Our hedge fund would have lost 10% on the day. However, at the open, I shorted the entire value of the fund. Let me take a look at some of the comments here. So Joyce is asking a question regarding the comment I made for before. So I'm going to stop reading for a minute and read Joyce's comment, and then I'll continue with the book. So Joyce is saying, I'm missing something. So you bought the car, you have the title for it. So how can the bankrupt dealer take it back? Because it has to do with the fact that the dealer took a loan and he's using the cars as collateral for the loan he took. So when the lender goes back and, tries to recoup some of those losses, that car that you purchased with cash is considered collateral. So that's how it works in this new system of debt and money. So okay. So he said our hedge fund would have lost 10% on the day. However, at the open, I shorted the entire value of the fund. Late in the day, I could see sheer panic selling. We were then in a position to buy into the panic. I covered the entire short position at the low. Only through these extremely stressful moves was the fund miraculously protected from loss, ending flat on the day. The NASDAQ composite finished down 8.6% on the day. At this time, the assets in the hedge fund were approximately $60 million. Over the next 3 years, they grew to more than $1.3 billion. By the late 1990s, I had understood that money creation by central banks was dwarfing real economic activity, and that the actions of the Federal Reserve were determining the direction of financial markets. This was considered to be conspiracy theory at the time, even by my partners. I developed a way to anticipate changes in the direction of the financial markets based on changes in the rate of growth of the money supply. This was being driven by open market operations of the New York Fed. By the time of the dot-com bubble, I knew that the velocity of money, and that's a term that you should write down. Write down that term or continue to recite it to yourself and research it. It's called velocity of money. I knew that the velocity of money had been collapsing. I saw incredible escalation in money creation, engendering little growth. I believed that in some great unfolding over many years, there would be a major depression, and that the only question was whether or not there would be a global war. This was prior to 9/11. So this goes back to the anecdotal story that I was telling you about when we moved to McKees Rocks in 2018, and JP and I were like, if what we have experienced in San Francisco, which is job loss and, encroaching poverty, if what we're experiencing is any indication of where the market is going, then in this new community of poverty that we moved into, we felt it was even more important to inspire the locals to have collective autonomy and civic engagement and civic empowerment and communicate with each other about how to make sure that they could keep their local economy running, because we felt that something was around the corner. And this was in 2019. We just felt it. And I'm sure a lot of you out there who are listening felt it, just like I'm sure you felt it in 2000 prior to the 9/11 event. You had some sort of intuition, some sort of, thought going on that said, I feel like the economy is going to do something. There would be a global crash or something like that. Okay? I developed a way of using hundreds of carefully selected positions on the short side, dubbed the cream of the crap. Using this system, no one position could hurt us badly. And if I did it right, it would work much better than an index. Well, he sounds a lot like Michael Burry, for which the movie The Big Short was based on. The long side was more concentrated. Altogether, at any moment, we typically had on more than 350 positions. Working such a large number required a specially designed trading desk and team technique. We regularly positioned on the other side of trading flows, patiently drawing size to us across the bid and asked spread. Observing and probing this many positions gave us broad real-time market sensitivity or granularity. We could move size without moving the market, utilizing available liquidity across many positions. The trading desk functioned as a newsroom, seeing everything as it was released and conducting continuous research. If a position was moving without news, we moved to find out why with urgency. It was necessary to carefully and continuously feed and challenge an integrated model of how the world was working and of all of our positions. This model was not on paper, it was in my head. This allowed us to act immediately when confronted with significant developments, but it was absolutely vital to focus immediately on any information or development which did not comport with the mental model. When sifting new information, I did not focus so much on things that fit my ideas as on those that did not, that threatened my understanding. So this is, sort of backwards thinking. And this is, I'll admit, this is sometimes how I think. When sifting new information, I do not focus on so much on things that fit my ideas, but instead I focus on those things that do not, those things that might threaten my understanding. And a lot of you think this way as well. It's kind of a backwards way of thinking, but it helps you to get through situations that don't seem to make any sense, situations which border on lawlessness and 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 rights grabs and things like that, and situations that even would go against capitalism, right? So the intuitive mind, when adequately and correctly informed, can be miraculously powerful, knowing immediately what the rational mind cannot see. So what do JP and I always tell our listeners and our followers? We live practically 90% intuition. That's how we live our life. That's how we are guided through life, is through intuition. So let me read this line again from him. The intuitive mind, when adequately and correctly informed, can be miraculously powerful, knowing immediately what the rational mind cannot yet see. On the other hand, if it is given bad information and if incorrect assumptions are not surfaced and challenged, it is a dysfunctional disaster. The rational mind can be employed to inform the intuitive with vetted information and continuously test what the intuitive mind thinks it knows. With cooperation between these aspects of the mind, one can drill down to examine detail and zoom out to see bigger implications, and vice versa. Ultimately, deep due diligence requires spelling out one's own assumptions and rigorously testing them. Primary source documents may provide irrefutable information. Biased sources can be used, but one must recognize the bias and account for it in vetting the information. A statement that is consistent with the bias is of little significance. However, something acknowledged which runs counter to the bias is likely factual. To really know something, one must go directly to people with immediate experience of the situation. You can't really know by talking with someone who has only read about it. If I suddenly realized that I needed to know something critical, I sometimes went directly to the airport with just the clothes on my back, flew across the country, and waited for the person with whom I needed to speak, even though I had no meeting scheduled. That actually worked rather well. It helps to hear things directly from people when they are a bit surprised and off script. Dad had told me that understanding terminology is the key to functioning in any field. I had found through my due diligence work that it was possible to become conversant within a surprisingly short period of time, even in technical issues with leaders in a field. It was done by doing it. After the first conversation, I was better equipped for the second. And with each conversation, I was able to better hone in on the substantive questions. By the third conversation, the other person actually became interested in speaking with me because I had just spoken with two people in their field about some interesting issues. And it built from there. I could do this with physicians, chemical engineers, and even neuroscientists. They sometimes asked if I had trained in their field. There was a small medical device company growing at a high rate on which I had done a great deal of deep due diligence work. We had a large position. It was thinly traded, and so I monitored the situation very carefully. I had a detailed model of the monthly sales ramp built up by the reorder rate at individual hospitals. One day, the company reported sales which missed my projection. They were still growing at a high rate, but in adjusting my model, I could see that the reorder rate must have fallen at some hospital. No one else seemed to have noticed this, and the company was acknowledging no issues. I started cold calling into hospitals. I managed to get an OR nurse on the phone who had just come out of surgery. She told me all about why they had stopped using the device. I knew then that the sales for this company would go to zero. I now had a big problem: how to get everybody out. Not only did the hedge funds have a big problem, but also a large number of accounts for individual clients, which I still handled at that time. On top of that, close friends were also heavily in the shares, as well as the school I had supported. It took weeks to patiently work down positions and get everyone out without loss. We handled it all from our trading desk, including coordinating sales for friends and for the school. I made sure it was all done. Then the people at our desk could sell their shares. When that was done, the second to last sale was for my mother. The last shares sold were those of my immediate family. I made sure everyone on the desk saw how I had handled it. To front run your clients and everyone you say you care about, that is trashy. Some people operate with the certainty that they should help themselves first, especially in important matters. I know it's done, but it's something I would not do. I would not allow it. In the course of this, I flushed out certain institutional brokers at a certain prime broker who had arranged to be secretly copied on my trades and were piggybacking them. I now suspect that toward the end, the prime brokers were allowing traders to front run my month end liquidations. We used the entire balance sheet. On days with big market moves, we traded millions of shares and might have gained or lost tens of millions of dollars. Handling this required emotional calm and intense focus. I told my wife that it was like performance art. I made a practice of focusing outside of myself and of actually placing duty and responsibility to others ahead of my own interests. For me, my work was not about making money. It had to be about more than that, or I could not have carried the immense burden of it all. My clients included a former U.S. Treasury Secretary, a former president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, and some of the largest institutional investors. People from Switzerland flew into Cleveland. They were trying to understand the secret of how I was doing what I was doing. But there was no secret algorithm. It was a way of thinking. My mother asked what courses I had taken or books I had read to teach me to do what I was doing. And I responded, Mom, there are no books explaining this. Busying oneself with absorbing the pronouncements of media, government officials, business executives, and such mouthpieces creates an illusion of being informed. As Samuel Clemens said, it's not what you don't know that kills you, it's what you know for sure that isn't so. Through hard experience, I came to know that while it may be quite difficult to know the truth, it is fairly easy to detect lies. People behave in disappointing ways when large amounts of money or unrestrained ego are involved. With both, there is sure to be trouble. When I discovered that I had been the target of a long planned betrayal, I was dismayed and chose to begin again. Starting over meant liquidating the hedge funds I had been managing. Between September 1st, 1998 and November 9th, 2002, when I liquidated the funds, the total return on these funds was 258%. Net of fees, the gross return was over 320%. In comparison, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq had declined over this period, which spanned the extremes of the dot-com bubble and bust. If there were any funds in the world that did as well through this period as did mine, they were very few. These results were audited. Further, they were now cash-on-cash returns, and so clients knew them to be absolutely and stunningly real. It's one thing to receive statements. It's quite another to actually have received the funds. One client called immediately and offered to back me with $1 billion, explaining that I then would not need to raise money. It was an extraordinary moment for me. I was hugely flattered, but ended up declining the offer when I learned of a side letter that would have put other clients at a disadvantage. While the dot-com bust was underway, I was asked to meet with George Soros at the offices of Soros Management in New York. I carried into the meeting a single piece of paper. This was a graph showing that the growth rate of U.S. capital spending had blown through 5 standard deviations above the mean, having never in history broken above 3 standard deviations. I explained that this meant there would inevitably be a historic bust. So you recall that the standard deviations event, this term, standard deviation, and again, a term I think you should write down, was introduced to us, at least us over here, we're not financial people. Maybe you guys had heard of it before, through Edward Dowd, who talked about how it was something like a 3, 5, or 6 standard deviation event when the insurance companies were, having to pay out claims for all of these people who were typically healthy and were a good bet were suddenly dying off. So this is what, and you can see a standard deviation event on a graph. You can see it when the market implodes or explodes or dips or rises. You can see it on a graph. Soros looked closely at my piece of paper, looked up at me and said, "This is good." He studied the paper further, looked up at me again and said, "This is very good." He did not agree with me about the best, but said they cannot allow the equity culture to fail. And I said, "What can they do that they haven't already done?" And he said in answer, "You don't know what they can do." So in such a moment, even George Soros spoke of a they. He then smiled and said, "Thank you," meaning this was the end of the meeting. One of the handlers followed me out of the room and said, "How did you do that? I've never seen anyone do that." I was amazed and flattered to have anything to do with George Soros and that he took me, this kid from Ohio, seriously. He certainly knew a great deal that I did not know. But on the other hand, I knew things he did not know. Early in 2003, I met with him again at his office, showed him a one-page chart of the astounding growth in asset-backed securities, and predicted that this would be the basis of the next bubble and crash. He said, "You're crazy." But he was very interested in how I was doing what I was doing. And I explained it to him. And he said, "You have rhythm. Other people can get rhythm too." God. I'm sorry, but George Soros sounds like a clown, doesn't he? Especially with the way David Rogers Webb describes him. Let's see. I've got about 8 more minutes, so I'm gonna read the next couple of paragraphs and then I'll wrap it up. I started again in January of 2003 with about $300 million in assets and a further $300 million in commitments, taking on 24 employees, which meant that no one lost their job. Through the peak of the dot-com bubble, I had been able to, quote, fight the Fed because I could see the acceleration and deceleration in their liquidity injections. I could already see that there would be another even bigger bust. I felt I had the responsibility to protect people and to keep going and to do it again. But it would be different this time. The next couple of years nearly killed me. The markets had always functioned largely as a closed system, excepting the open market operations of the New York Fed, which I had learned to monitor and interpret. I could see flows from one sector of the market to another. In order for some areas of the financial markets to rise significantly, other sectors were being sold to provide the funds. I looked for opportunities to work opposite to these flows and rotations, buying what others had orders to sell and selling what others wanted to buy, but drawing them through the bid asked spread. So let's go ahead and just pause here and I'll pick it up next week. Like I mentioned before, the prologue is pretty long. But I think it's important that we know the history of Mr. Webb before we can go into the actual meat of the book. And let me mark where I left off so that I don't repeat myself. Okay, so all right. So one thing that some people have asked us is, and I'll just spend the last 5 minutes of this just talking about, financial stuff. And so one of the things that people have asked us is, how could you possibly give up your home, which you paid cash for, and get into a mortgage? Well, the problem is that we were living in a space where it's so deprived. There were sinkholes outside of our house. There was gunshots all the time, gunfire all the time. lots of condemned homes, and the locals were celebrating those homes being demolished instead of putting money into trying to fix them up. Old, beautiful homes that had just been abandoned and were considered, dangerous. There were mysterious fires popping up, and also we felt that what we had done to the home and what we had invested in it would serve somebody else. We didn't know, but we're starting to get this feeling. We didn't know who and we didn't know how. Well, it turns out the people that bought our home absolutely love it. They love the little, improvements that we made to it. They have children, small children, and those small children are then becoming friends with the other small children in the area. So, and I'm hoping that the families that are the 2 or 3 families that are now living, there will focus on maybe turning the abandoned trash-filled lot across the street from our old home, turning that into a little playground or something for the children. And I think that, we just could never, we just could never make it happen for them, but I think they could do it for themselves. You know what I'm saying? So it was a good, positive move. And so there is a serious balancing act in managing a household, in managing finances, and also doing the right thing, and also living the kind of life that you deserve to live. Um, there have been donations made to us on this platform. And almost every single one of those cash donations I have either turned into the purchase of I follow the for fun. I'm not a financial advisor, so let me put this out there. But for fun, as a hobby, I follow the market on like gold and silver. I don't pretend to be an expert in any of it. And I recently saw that a coin that I had been watching, which its melt value is also its value, and its collector value is also value. So you want it. So for me, what I do is I look for coins that have both, a value of collectability and also a melt value. So you always want something. I always look for something that's like 0.999, 9% of, say, either gold or silver. Okay. So I had been watching something for a long time, and gold is down a little bit now. And I took the opportunity and bought this one particular coin I'd been watching. And so, that's what I think that in my opinion, again, not a financial advisor, but I do know that David Rogers Webb feels this way as well. Putting your money back into tangibles and improving the tangibles that you do have. Like, we have, a lot more land now. So we're going to turn the land into, this spring, we're going to start back in with gardening and, planting food. So if you have a little bit of land, put some food in it. Grow some tomatoes and some cucumbers or zucchini. Also beautify it. So we are, fixing some things about the house that we absolutely need, like good plumbing, good electricity, things like that. We're getting rid of things we don't need. We don't need a dishwasher. So we're getting rid of the dishwasher and then putting in shelves instead. So we're basing our own value system, and in taking, what little bit of cash that I set aside every week and applying it towards, those kinds of things. Sometimes, emergencies happen, and that those have to be eggplant. Exactly, Sean. That would be an amazing thing to grow. I don't know if eggplant will grow out here in the Gulf Coast, but we'll see, because I certainly love eggplant parmesan, right? So, but I really feel that that's important. Taking, if you have a paycheck and you are, you earn money, whether you are, on some sort of benefits program, which there's no shame in being, on benefits. If you're on, or if you're retired, or if you have a job, if you could take you know, 20, 50, $100 a week and put it aside so that at the end of the year you can say, oh wow, look at this. I can do a thing. That's how we live our life. And this year we were able to support some friends who needed some strong support in Pittsburgh. We were able to support them through a donation, and we were able to help fund a family get back on their feet who had been burned out of their home on Christmas Eve right here, just a few blocks from where we live. So, it's important that you live well and live for yourself, but that you're not too selfish, right? That you extend your yourself out there. By extending yourself, think of your body, your energy, your opinions, and your thoughts, and your agency. Think of it as investment. Think of it as an investment back into your community. So I feel that trade and commerce and even the way that we operate our local economies is starting to slowly shift into a new kind of paradigm, and it's a paradigm that JP and I have always wished for, which is really, it's about autonomy. You do a thing for me and I do a thing for you, and it's a life of gratitude and investment into human energy and human heart. Is so important. So, I feel like I'm kind of tripping over my words. I'm trying to find the right words, but I think we found the answer. And even though on paper we may look like, oh my God, what are we doing? The fact is that every month, at the end of the month, when I balance my budget, and sometimes I have to balance a budget every week because it is a challenge, it always works out. Something happens where, we get a teeny little windfall, and so we're able to go buy those groceries we need because we're like, oh, the refrigerator's starting to get empty and we don't have any money for 2 weeks, and boom, suddenly something happens, like uh, like our electric bill is miraculously low, and so we have a little extra money to, you know what I'm saying? So these things always just kind of happen. Then that's what I mean by living on intuition. We often just live through intuition, and it makes for a very pleasant life and a very happy life. So, and that's really where it starts too, is your attitude, right? Be genuine and be happy. Oh yeah, Sean, there is no doubt about that. The powers that be do have an agenda, make it difficult, if not impossible, for residential farming. And also, the weather patterns out here on the Gulf Coast are different than they are in California and different than they are even in Pittsburgh. So we have to keep that in mind. But I know other people that live here in the Gulf area or in the South, and they have beautiful gardens, and they're able to, plant herbs and food. So I have no doubt that, especially with JP, he's a genius at this kind of stuff, and that it will work out. So tune in next Friday, a week from today at 10 a.m. once again, and I will continue reading The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. And I am so enormously grateful for the book itself, and especially for the person who sent it to us. It's such a gift. And so I felt like this would be an amazing story to read. And earlier today, I did show you where you could go to his Twitter page, and it doesn't have very many followers. Shockingly, I figured he would have, at least half a million followers by now, but he doesn't yet. So we'll see. I'm sure he will grow in popularity as we put these little seeds out, and he's seen more and more. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream now, and have a great weekend, and we'll see you in a week. Bye.